I used to double-check every light switch, every message, every word I said because I honestly believed I was going insane. Not in a dramatic way. I don't mean I was hearing voices or seeing things that weren't there. I mean the kind of insane where you start second-guessing the very fabric of your life. The kind where you can't trust your memory, your feelings, your own perception of reality. The kind where you feel like you're floating outside your body, watching someone else live your life, and that someone is constantly screwing things up. I didn't start off that way. When I first met Aiden, I felt like I had finally found someone who got me. He was smart, charming, attentive, not in that fake, over-the-top way that guys sometimes try to be, but in a quiet, thoughtful way. He remembered small details I told him, held eye contact like he actually cared about my answers, and laughed at my dumb jokes like they were the funniest thing he'd ever heard. I felt seen. I was 24, fresh out of grad school, still figuring out who I was. He seemed so grounded, so confident. Being around him made me feel like maybe I was finally becoming the woman I always wanted to be, someone calm, mature, in control. But it didn't take long for the confusion to start. The first time it happened, I brushed it off. I told him I'd be late getting home because of a team meeting at work. I knew I'd told him. I remembered the conversation, even the outfit I was wearing. But when I got home and he was irritated, I reminded him, gently, that I had let him know the night before. He tilted his head and smiled like I was a little girl. "You never said that," he replied. I paused. "I did. I told you. Last night. While we were making dinner." "No, babe, you must be confused," he said calmly. "You probably thought about telling me but forgot. It happens." I stood there, blinking. That was such a me thing to do, get overwhelmed and forget. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had thought it and never said it out loud. I apologized. And that was how it started. A missed text. You never told me that. You're remembering it wrong." Little, seemingly harmless corrections. That's how he did it, like he was helping me. Like I was this sweet, slightly scattered girl who just needed a little fine-tuning. And I believed him. Because when someone says something with enough calm certainty, it makes you question your own brain. Especially when they love you. Especially when you love them back. The thing about gaslighting is that it doesn't feel like abuse at first. It feels like self-doubt. Like maybe you really are just forgetful. Sensitive. Emotional. He never raised his voice. He never called me names. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he gently chipped away at me with corrections. I started writing things down. Not to prove him wrong, I wasn't even thinking that way yet, but just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. One night, I scribbled a reminder in my planner. Told Aiden about Mom's birthday dinner. A week later, when I brought it up, he stared at me blankly. "You never told me that," he said again, expression flat. I felt heat rising in my chest. "No, I did. I even wrote it down after I said it." He chuckled. Not cruelly.
Just amuset.
"You probably meant to, but you didn't." That laugh. That condescending little smirk. It made me feel like a child trying to argue with a teacher. Like of course he was right. And of course I was just confused. Again. That night, I ripped the page out of my planner and threw it away. I didn't want him to see it and think I was keeping tabs on him. That would make me look crazy. Right? I started saying sorry all the time. Sorry for snapping when I was just being assertive. Sorry for being emotional when I was just frustrated. Sorry for remembering things differently. Sorry for feeling what I felt. And slowly, I stopped talking to my friends as much. Because how do you explain something like this? It's just little things. I'd say on the phone to my best friend Katie. "I think I'm just stressed." "You sure everything's okay?" she asked once. "You don't sound like yourself lately."
I'm fine, Elite.
"Really? Just tired." And I was. Tired in the way that seeps into your bones. Tired of trying to remember, trying to keep track, trying to be better, so I wouldn't keep messing things up. I thought love was supposed to make you feel safe. But with Aiden, I was always on edge. Like I was tiptoeing across a minefield made of my own mind. Every day, I lost a little more of myself. And I hadn't even realized it yet. I started apologizing for things I didn't do. It became instinct, like breathing. I'd say sorry for forgetting to pick something up from the store, even when it had never been on the list. Sorry for changing plans last minute, even though I hadn't. Sorry for using that tone, whatever that meant. It was like I was always a few steps behind in a conversation I didn't realize had started. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't catch up. Aiden had this way of looking at me when I pushed back. Not angry, just disappointed. Like I'd let him down somehow. "You're always so defensive," he'd say. "I'm not trying to fight. I'm trying to help you see how your actions affect people." And there it was, the twist. I wasn't just wrong. I was hurting him. So I'd crumble.
IDCRY.
And I'd say it again. "I'm sorry." It became a loop I didn't know how to escape from. One time, I spent hours planning a small weekend trip for us, found a cozy cabin, made an itinerary, even packed his favorite snacks. When I showed him, he barely looked up from his phone. "You didn't think to check the weather first?" he said flatly. "It's going to rain all weekend." I blinked. "I mean, it's a cabin. We could still relax, watch movies, make breakfast together." He cut me off with a sigh. "You always rush into things without thinking. It's exhausting, honestly." And just like that, the excitement I'd felt, the pride, dissolved into shame. I had checked the weather. I'd seen the forecast, and it was light rain, nothing major. But the way he said it, with such conviction, I started to wonder if I had checked the wrong week, or misread it, or made the whole thing up in my head. I deleted the reservation and said I'd do better next time. He kissed my forehead and said, "I know you will." And for a moment, I felt loved again. That's the thing about gaslighting. It isn't constant cruelty. It's breadcrumbs of affection sprinkled between the control. Just enough to keep you hungry. Just enough to keep you trying harder, thinking you are the problem that needs fixing. I couldn't see it then. I just thought I wasn't enough. The world got quieter. Friends stopped calling as much. Not because they didn't care, but because I stopped answering. I always had an excuse. I was tired, busy, behind on work. But the truth was, I didn't know how to talk to anyone anymore. I couldn't explain what was happening, because I couldn't explain it to myself. How do you tell someone that your boyfriend makes you feel like a stranger in your own mind? That every conversation leaves you questioning what you know to be true? I'd stare at my phone, rereading texts before sending them, then reread them again after. Just in case I'd said something wrong. Just in case he found a way to twist it later. One night, I got a message from Katie. "Miss your face. Want to grab brunch Sunday?" I almost replied yes. I typed it out, even. But then I thought, what if Aiden wanted to do something that day? What if he felt left out? What if he said, "You never told me you were going out," and I had to go through the whole cycle again? So I deleted the message,
Turned off my phone.
and told myself it was better this way. He hadn't told me to stop seeing my friends. He didn't forbid anything. That's what made it so confusing. But every time I made plans without checking in, he'd sulk, or withdraw, or make little comments like, "It's just weird that you'd rather be with them than me." I didn't want to hurt him. I didn't want to make him feel unwanted. So I just stopped. Stopped laughing the way I used to do. Stopped dancing around the kitchen when music came on. Stopped reaching out to people who loved me before he did. The more isolated I became, the more I depended on him. And the more I depended on him, the easier it was for him to reshape my world. Looking back, that was one of the darkest parts, the silence. Not the screaming. Not the slamming doors. The quiet unraveling of my voice, my spark, my joy. I didn't feel like myself anymore. But I couldn't remember what myself even felt like. There was a night I'll never forget. Not because something explosive happened, but because nothing did.
No yelling.
No fighting. Just me, sitting on the floor of our bathroom, trying to catch my breath while staring at a bottle of Advil like it had answers. I had just had another one of those spirals. We were watching a movie, something romantic, and a scene came on where the guy surprises the girl with flowers. I smiled and offhandedly said, "You used to do stuff like that." He muted the TV. "Used to?" I turned to him, confused. "I mean, in the beginning, you'd leave me little notes. Surprise me after work. That kind of thing. His face hardened. So now I'm some neglectful boyfriend?
What?
No, I was just saying, you're always twisting things. Always making me out to be the bad guy. I didn't mean it that way. I'm tired of constantly defending myself from your accusations. It's like living with someone unstable. Unstable.
That word hit me like a slap.
And the worst part, I believed him. I remember standing up, walking into the bathroom, and locking the door. Not dramatically, just quietly, like I was trying not to wake up a sleeping child. I sat on the cold tile, heart racing, trying to remember what I'd even said. Trying to figure out how that had turned into this stuff. And I couldn't. I genuinely couldn't find the thread anymore. That's when the thought hit me. Maybe I am mentally unstable. Maybe I was too sensitive, too emotional, too reactive. Maybe I'd always been this way and just didn't see it until now. I opened my notes app and typed, "Need help. Something's wrong with me." That was the moment I stopped trusting my mind. The moment I gave up the last piece of myself and placed it in his hands. If he said I was wrong, I was wronged. If he said I misremembered, I misremembered. If he said I needed to change, I would do whatever it took to become the version of me he could finally love again. I wasn't trying to be weak. I was trying to survive. And survival, when you don't know you're being abused, looks a lot like self-blame. After that night, something in me cracked. Not shattered. That would have been obvious. This was quieter, more dangerous. I didn't fall apart. I adapted. I started hiding the parts of myself that made him uncomfortable. My opinions. My jokes.
Even my memories.
If he said something didn't happen, I'd nod. If he corrected me, I'd smile and say, "You're right." Even when I knew, deep down, that he wasn't. But I had stopped fighting it. It was easier this way. Less exhausting. And somewhere along the line, I forgot there was even a me left to protect. One afternoon, I was making lunch, grilled cheese and tomato soup, something simple, something he used to say he loved. I set the plate down in front of him and kissed his cheek. He didn't look up. "You know I don't like this kind of bread," he said. I blinked.
What?
"You used to." "Why do you always do this?" he snapped, suddenly sharp. "You never listen." My stomach dropped. I had listened. I always listened. I had made notes of the things he liked. But there it was again. That same icy tone. That same accusation that somehow I had failed him. Again. I stared at the sandwich, like it was a symbol of everything I was doing wrong. I picked it up, threw it in the trash, and said I'd make something else. And he went back to scrolling on his phone like nothing had happened. That's when I realized I was walking through my life, trying not to trigger him. Like he was a sleeping bear, and I was tiptoeing around the forest of our relationship, praying I wouldn't step on a twig. And every time I did, every time I spoke up, remembered something differently, or even laughed too loudly, it was my fault. He made sure of it. "You get overwhelmed so easily," he'd say. "You always make everything about you. You're imagining things again." I started researching therapists, not for us, just for me. I genuinely thought I needed fixing. That maybe a professional could help me stop being so broken. But I was too afraid to make the call. Because what if the therapist agreed with him? What if I really was the problem? It was a Tuesday. Not a dramatic day. Not a rock-bottom moment. Just a Tuesday. I was at work, waiting for a meeting to start, when I opened a random article someone had shared in a group chat. The title was, "What is Gaslighting? The Emotional Abuse You Might Not Even See." I clicked on it out of boredom. I wasn't expecting anything life-changing. But by the second paragraph, my hands were shaking. The article described everything. Not just the behavior, but the effect, the confusion, the constant apologies, the second-guessing, the fear of bringing things up because it might start another spiral. It described me. I reread a sentence over and over again. Gaslighting victims often begin to distrust their own memories, perception, and instincts, relying more and more on the abuser for a sense of what is real. I swear I couldn't breathe. I looked around the conference room. People were chatting about numbers and schedules, and I was sitting there realizing I wasn't crazy. I was being manipulated. Systematically. Subtly. Intentionally. That word, gaslighting, cracked something open inside me. It didn't fix everything. It didn't instantly make me brave. But it gave me language. Language is power. And until that moment, I hadn't had the words to name what was happening to me. Now I did. I went down a rabbit hole that night. I read everything I could find: articles, personal stories, research papers. I watched YouTube videos of women explaining their own experiences. I cried through every single one of them, because for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. And more importantly, I didn't feel crazy. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't broken. I was being gaslit. Aiden came home later than usual that night. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop still open, a notebook full of scribbles and underlined quotes in front of me. I looked up at him and whispered, "Have you ever heard the term gaslighting?" He froze. It was the first time I had said something he didn't know how to spin. He shrugged it off. Don't start with internet psychology. But it was too late. Something had shifted. For the first time, I trusted my reality more than his version of it. And that terrified him. After that night, things changed, not immediately, but undeniably. I didn't confront him. I wasn't ready. But I started observing. Quietly. Closely. Every time he corrected me, I wrote it down. Every time he denied something that happened, I wrote my version next to it. Not because I needed proof, but because I needed to remind myself that I wasn't losing my mind. And once I stopped accepting his version of reality, I started seeing the cracks in his carefully polished mask. The calm turned cold. The soft smiles became stiff. He knew he was losing control, and that made him unpredictable. One night, we were in the car driving to his friend's birthday dinner. I mentioned a story he'd told me before about a prank he pulled in college. He cut me off mid-sentence. "I never told you that." I turned to look at him. "Yes, you did." He gripped the steering wheel tighter. "No, I didn't. Don't put words in my mouth." There was silence for a moment. Then, for the first time, I didn't apologize. I didn't backtrack. I just stared out the window and said quietly, "Okay." I think that scared him more than any outburst ever could. Because when someone stops defending themselves, stops playing the game, it means they're planning an exit. The more I detached, the more desperate he became. Suddenly, he was showering me with affection again. Buying flowers. Sending long texts about how much he loved me. Telling me I was his everything. If it had been a few weeks earlier, I might have believed it. But now I could see it for what it was: panic. This wasn't love. This was damage control. And deep down, I started realizing that I didn't love him anymore. I loved the idea of who he was once. But that version had never really existed. I had been in love with a mirage. And the more I tried to reach it, the more I lost myself. I wasn't ready to leave yet. But for the first time, I was getting ready. Leaving him wasn't one big, dramatic moment. It was a series of tiny decisions that started with reclaiming my voice, the same voice he spent months trying to erase. I started journaling again. At first, it felt awkward, like I was writing to a stranger. But I kept going. Every night, I poured the confusion and pain and doubt onto the page. And little by little, I began to see the patterns. It wasn't just miscommunication. It wasn't just a rough patch. It was a cycle, a controlled loop of blame, confusion, and manipulation. I started talking to a therapist. I didn't even tell Aiden at first. I'd go during my lunch break or stay late at work and take the call from my card. The first time I said the words out loud, "I think I'm being gaslit," I burst into tears. Not because I was sad, because I was finally naming it. She didn't call me crazy. She didn't ask if I was overreacting. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You're not imagining this. This is emotional abuse." And I think something in me, something small and flickering, stood up that day. I started reconnecting with my old friends, one at a time. I didn't tell them everything.
Not yet.
But I let them back in. I answered calls. I said yes to brunch. I smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. Aiden noticed, of course. He'd make comments like, "You've been distant lately," or "You're always out now." But I didn't explain myself anymore. because I didn't owe him an explanation. And for the first time, I believed that. The final straw wasn't even a big fight. It was a quiet Sunday. He accused me, again, of forgetting something I knew I hadn't. And I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't apologize. I just looked at him, dead in the eyes, and said, I remember. You're just trying to make me doubt it. He froze. Because he knew. He knew I had woken up. And in that moment I did too. I wasn't broken. I wasn't crazy. I was a woman who had been manipulated, and now I was done. I left on a Wednesday. No yelling. No begging. No dramatic goodbye. I packed a bag while he was at work, left a note that simply said, I remember everything now. And I walked out. The apartment felt strangely quiet as I closed the door behind me. Not the kind of silence that used to haunt me, but the kind that felt clean, honest, like the first breath after being underwater for too long. It took time, months actually, to detox from his voice in my head. Even after I left, I still heard echoes of him. Are you sure that's what happened? You're being emotional. You're remembering it wrong. But every time I stood firm, every time I trusted my own thoughts, I chipped away at the damage. I read. I wrote. I cried more than I thought was humanly possible. But I healed. I learned how to listen to myself again. To trust that when something feels wrong, it probably is. That love should never make you doubt your sanity. That being safe isn't the same as being silent. Now, when I walk past a mirror, I actually recognize the woman looking back. She's not perfect. She's not always certain. But she's real. And she belongs to me. I tell this story not because it's easy to relive, but because someone out there might be sitting where I once Saturday. In the quiet. In the confusion. In the deep, suffocating doubt. So hear me now. Gaslighting is real. If someone makes you question your memory, your sanity, your instincts, that is not loved. That is abuse. You're not crazy. You are not overreacting. And you're not alone.
There is a way out. There is life on the other side.
And it's waiting for you. Patiently, lovingly, the way real love should. You are allowed to remember. You are allowed to believe yourself. You are allowed to begin again. I did. And I am never going back. If this story shook something in you, don't scroll away. Gaslighting is real. And most people don't even know it's happening to them. That's why we tell these stories. Because healing starts with recognition. Subscribe to this channel for more brutally honest, powerful stories like this one. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. And someone out there needs to hear it.
Share this.
Comment below. And most of all, never doubt your reality again.